I was sitting in my truck outside the house. I'd spent 3 months rebuilding with my own hands, every floor sanded, every wall painted, every nail driven with love. A red "Sold" sign stared back at me from the front yard. I called my son. "You didn't need to know, Dad." I sat there for a long moment. Then I said quietly, "All right, son, take care of yourself." I hung up, opened my laptop, and sent my attorney a single email with one document attached. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment and let me know, what are you doing right now while you listen? Working, driving, or just taking a moment for yourself, I genuinely appreciate you being here. A quick note: some details have been adjusted for storytelling. What matters is the message I hope you take with you. I am 69 years old, and I have spent 40 years fixing broken clocks, but I never learned how to turn back time. The watch shop sits empty now. I closed it 3 weeks ago, the same week I finished carving the wooden cradle that sits in the back of my truck outside. The afternoon light slants through the dusty windows, catching the edges of tools I no longer need: tiny screwdrivers, jeweler's loops, the magnifying lamp that guided my hands through thousands of repairs. Everything is packed, except for one thing: Margot's photograph on the wall behind the counter. My wife died 11 years ago at 58. Heart failure, sudden and merciless, on a Tuesday morning in spring. I still talk to her photograph every day, and if that makes me crazy, I don't particularly care. "Tomorrow morning, Margot," I say to her, gentle smile frozen in silver frame. I'm driving across town with the cradle in the back of my truck. I spent 3 weeks carving it. The cradle is white oak, hand-rubbed with linseed oil until the grain glows like honey. Every joint fits perfectly because I checked each one a dozen times. I carved small stars along the headboard. Margot always loved stars, and sanded everything smooth enough that no splinter could ever touch tender skin. My son Everett is 39 years old. He works in commercial real estate sales, makes 3 times what I ever earned, and drives a car that costs more than I paid for this entire shop. But that doesn't change what a father does. Every single dollar I saved, every extra hour I worked repairing pocket watches and grandfather clocks for tourists passing through Galena, Illinois, was for him, so he could have better than we did. "You always said you wanted a house filled with children's laughter." I tell Margot's photograph. "Tomorrow I think we're finally going to get that." The shop smells like machine oil and old wood and 40 years of careful work. I built a life here, one watch at a time. Fixed a Hamilton pocket watch for a man celebrating his 50th anniversary. Restored a Patek Philippe that had belonged to someone's grandfather in the war. Each repair was a small resurrection, bringing something broken back to life. I locked up the shop for good last week. Put a sign in the window: "Closed, thank you, for 40 years. People have been leaving notes on the door. Mrs. Henderson wrote that nobody else could fix her mother's watch the way I did. Tom Brennan said I was the last honest craftsman in town. But I'm not closing because I'm tired. I'm closing because I have something more important to build." How do you measure a life? By the hours worked, the watches repaired, or by the dreams you build for someone who will never know the price you paid? I measure mine in the distance between what Margot and I had and what I'm giving Everett. We lived in a small house with 1 bathroom and a furnace that broke every winter. We drove the same Ford truck for 22 years. We never took a vacation that wasn't visiting her sister 3 hours away. But we were happy, and Everett never went without. He went to college. He married a woman named Saskia, who works in marketing and wears clothes that look expensive. They live in a modern apartment downtown with granite countertops and a view I could never afford. And now they're having a baby. The call came 8 months ago on an autumn evening when the leaves were just starting to turn. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, reading the newspaper by lamplight, when the phone rang. "Dad," Everett said, and his voice had a brightness I hadn't heard in years. "Saskia's pregnant. We're going to have a baby." My hand tightened around the receiver. My throat closed up with something too big to name. "A boy," he continued. "We found out last week. Dad, you're going to have a grandson." I couldn't speak. I just stood there in my kitchen, gripping the phone, feeling something crack open inside my chest, something that had been frozen since Margot died. "And listen," Everett said, his words tumbling out fast, now excited. "We've been talking. We want to stay here in Illinois. We want him to grow up knowing his grandfather. We want you close, Dad. We want you to be part of this." I set the coffee cup down carefully because my hands were shaking. "That's good," I managed to say. "That's real good, son." We talked for another 20 minutes. Saskia was due in May. They were thinking of names. They'd need to find a bigger place before the baby came. Everything was happening so fast. I didn't tell him about the land right away. I wanted to surprise him. I wanted to see his face when I handed him the keys. The retirement land, 40 acres my father left me when he passed up in the hills outside town. Beautiful property with oak trees older than I am and a spring-fed creek running through the back corner. I'd always planned to build a small cabin there someday, spend my final years watching the seasons change and the deer come down to drink at dusk. But plans change. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of the bedroom. Margot and I had shared for 34 years. My heart was so full it hurt. I thought about her hands folded on her chest in the hospital, how she'd made me promise not to spend my life alone, how she'd smiled even then and said, "Our boy is going to give us beautiful grandchildren someday, Leland. You make sure you're around to see them." "I'm going to do better than be around," I whispered to the darkness. "I'm going to give them a home." By morning, my decision was made. I would sell the retirement land. I would withdraw everything I'd saved, every dollar tucked away in certificates of deposit and savings bonds, and the small investment account the bank had talked me into. I would buy them a house, not rent by. A real house with a yard where my grandson could play, where Everett could build the life Margot and I had always dreamed of for him. I would make this happen. I would give them what we never had. I had no idea I was building the cage for my own heartbreak. The house smelled like other people's lives, old carpet, faint cigarette smoke, decades of dinners cooked and forgotten, and I knew I had exactly 3 months to make it smell like love. I closed the sale in early June, wrote a check for the full amount, watched my account balance drop to almost nothing, and felt only purpose. The realtor handed me the keys with a confused expression, probably wondering why a 69-year-old man would empty his savings for a suburban ranch house when he already owned a home. She didn't understand. Nobody did. The first thing I did was tear up the carpet. Underneath was solid oak hardwood, scarred but salvageable. I rented a floor sander and spent 4 days bringing the grain back to life. My back screamed. My knees swelled. I didn't care. "I'm painting the nursery pale blue, Margot," I said to the empty room that would hold my grandson. "I know we never got to do this for Everett, but we're doing it now." I worked alone through June and July. Painted every room myself. Replaced the dripping kitchen faucet. Fixed the back door that stuck. Installed new light fixtures. Every morning I arrived at 7 and worked until sunset. I brought sandwiches in a cooler and ate lunch on the front porch, looking at the small yard where children would someday play. The wooden cradle I'd carved went into the nursery corner where morning light would fall across it. I'd rubbed the oak with linseed oil until it glowed carved small stars along the headboard, the way Margot always loved. I stood there imagining a baby sleeping safe inside something made by his grandfather's hands. In late July, I planted an oak sapling in the front yard. It was barely taller than my knee when I pressed the soil around its roots and poured water until the ground was dark and rich. Grow strong, I told it. Someone is coming who will need your shade. I planted that tree knowing I might not live to see it reach full height. But isn't that what grandparents do? Plant trees whose shade they'll never sit under. Before I locked up for the last time, I went down to the basement. The previous owners had finished half of it concrete floor drywall, decent lighting. The other half was raw foundation, and that's where I'd had the contractor install the climate-controlled room 3 years ago. Behind the false wall panel was the steel door. My wine collection. 35 years of anniversaries and milestones. Over 400 bottles, some older than my son. A 1985 Chateau Margaux from the year Everett graduated high school. A 1990 Petrus I'd been saving for his wedding. Bottles from Burgundy and Bordeaux and Napa Valley, each one chosen with care, stored at precisely 55 degrees and 60% humidity. I'd moved the entire collection here when I bought the house, had it professionally transported in climate-controlled trucks. Worth over $2 million now, according to the appraiser I'd consulted last year. But I wasn't keeping it for the money. Margot and I had built that collection together, one bottle at a time, each one marking a moment in our life. Our anniversary, the night Everett was born, the evening she beat cancer the first time. Every bottle had a memory attached. The house was Everett's. The collection was mine. On the last Saturday in August, I met my son and his wife at my attorney's office. Garrett Holbrook had been handling my legal matters for 15 years. He was 58 years old, methodical and careful, the kind of lawyer who read every word twice. His office smelled like old books and coffee. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and wore a dress that accommodated her growing belly. She smiled at me with genuine warmth. "Mr. Harrington, this is incredibly generous," she said. Everett sat beside her in his business suit, checking his phone under the table. The deed transfer is straightforward," Garrett said, sliding papers across his desk. "The house becomes joint property of Everett and Saskia Harrington, gifted from Leland Harrington. However, Mr. Harrington has insisted on one rider to this transfer." He produced a second document. "This rider clearly states that the wine collection in the basement remains your father's personal property," Garrett explained. "Separate from the gifted real estate. The collection may not be sold, moved, or altered without Mr. Harrington's written permission. Upon his death, it will be distributed according to his will." Everett glanced at the document. "Sure, Dad. That's fine." "The wine collection has considerable value," Garrett continued. "I want to be certain you understand." "I understand," Everett said. "It's Dad's stuff. We're not going to touch it." Saskia leaned over to read the rider. "Is the collection in the house now?" "I'm in the basement," I said. "Behind a locked door, climate-controlled. You won't even notice it's there." "How much is it worth?" she asked. That's my private collection," I said, keeping my voice level. "It stays mine until I decide otherwise." She nodded. Everett was already signing the first page, barely glancing at the words. Garrett slid the rider across. "This page as well, please." Everett signed his name in 2 places without reading. Saskia signed beside him. How well do we really know the people we love? And how often do we mistake our assumptions for understanding? Garrett witnessed the signatures, stamped the documents, and handed Everett a folder. "Congratulations! You're homeowners." My son stood and shook my hand. His palm was soft, no calluses. "Thanks, Dad. This is more than we ever expected." I handed him the house keys. 2 silver keys on a ring I'd bought specially engraved with their new address. "Take care of that oak tree," I said. "It's going to be there long after all of us." We walked out into August sunlight. Everett and Saskia got into their expensive car and drove toward their new house, the house I'd spent 3 months preparing, the house that smelled like love now, instead of strangers. My son had signed the rider without reading it twice. Why would he? He didn't know what was behind that steel door. Neither did his wife. Nobody did except me and my attorney. I thought that legal protection was enough. But I was about to learn that paper and ink mean nothing when people decide to disappear. The first time my son didn't call me back, I told myself he was busy. The 10th time I ran out of excuses. Paper and ink promised protection. A legal writer witnessed and notarized protecting what was mine. But contracts only matter when the people who sign them stay where you can find them. And by late November, 3 months after I'd handed Everett the keys to his new house, I was beginning to understand the difference between legal protection and real life. September passed with weekly calls that felt increasingly perfunctory. Everett's voice always rushed, always apologetic. "Sorry, Dad, work is crazy right now. Saskia's not feeling well, morning sickness, you know. We're still getting settled in." I told myself it was normal. Young couples preparing for their first baby had 1,000 things to worry about. They didn't need an old man calling every few days asking how they were doing. October brought calls every 2 weeks. The excuses stayed the same, just delivered faster. By November, I'd stopped calling altogether and waited for him to reach out first. He didn't. I spent those months in my watch shop, even though I'd officially closed it. The space felt safer than my empty house. I'd sit at my workbench surrounded by clocks I no longer repaired, their mechanical ticking, filling the silence where my son's voice used to be. "He's busy, Margot," I said to her photograph on the wall. "The baby's coming in a few months. Young people get overwhelmed. It's normal." But 3 weeks into November, when I realized I hadn't heard Everett's voice since before Halloween, I stopped pretending it was normal. "Maybe I should drive over there," I said to the photograph. "Just to check. Make sure they're doing okay." Margot's smile never changed. It never did. She'd been frozen at 58 for 11 years now, forever younger than I was becoming, forever unable to tell me whether I was being paranoid or whether a father's instinct knew something his mind refused to accept. The clocks ticked around me. Dozens of them, all slightly out of sync, creating a layered rhythm that sounded almost like conversation. They measured time without judgment. They never lied about what was passing. They just kept moving whether you were ready or not. When does absence stop being circumstance and start being choice? When does a son's silence become his own language? I knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to admit it. The wooden cradle still sat in the back of my truck, wrapped in a canvas tarp. I'd meant to bring it to them in September, but Everett kept saying they weren't ready yet. The nursery wasn't finished. They'd let me know when to bring it over. Eventually, I stopped offering. On a cold evening in early December, I was locking up the shop when Harold Buckley stopped me on Main Street. Harold was 68, a retired postal worker who'd lived 3 houses down from the home I'd given to Everett. He had a weathered face that usually wore an easy smile, but tonight his expression was tight with worry. "Hot Leland," he said, his breath making small clouds in the frigid air. "I hate to ask, but do you know what your son is doing? I've been worrying whether I should say something." My hand tightened on my keyring. "What do you mean?" Harold shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "The house. Your son's house. There've been moving trucks. At night. Late night. Moving trucks." My voice sounded strange in my own ears. "When?" "Started about a week ago. Maybe more. I've seen them 3-4 times now. Always around 2 in the morning. Big trucks, professional movers loading up furniture and boxes." The cold air suddenly felt colder. "At 2 in the morning, are you sure it was his house?" "I'm sure, Leland. I couldn't sleep one night, got up for water, looked out my front window, and saw the whole thing lit up. Men carrying out your son's couch, the dining table boxes. Your son was supervising, pointing where things should go. His wife was there too." "Did you talk to him?" Harold shook his head. "Never saw him during the day. That's the strange part. The house looks normal in daylight, curtains, drawn car in the driveway sometimes, but at night they're emptying it out. Been going on nearly a week now. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Something that had nothing to do with the early winter wind cutting down Main Street. Have any of the neighbors talked to him? Shots, that's what I'm saying, Leland. Nobody's seen him. Nobody even knew he was moving until the trucks showed up. Mrs. Chen next door said she hasn't seen him in weeks. She tried knocking once to ask about borrowing a ladder and nobody answered even though she could hear someone inside. He didn't tell anyone he was leaving. Not a word. And Leland. Harold hesitated, his face troubled. People don't move at 2 in the morning unless they're trying to avoid something. Or someone. We stood there on the sidewalk as the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the empty storefronts. The watch shop behind me was dark. The whole street felt abandoned. Maybe there's an explanation, Harold said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Maybe his company is relocating him and they're on a tight timeline. Maybe I said, but we both knew better. Harold put his hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry, Leland. I thought you should know. He walked away, his footsteps echoing on the cold pavement. I stood there holding my keys, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. 2 in the morning. My son moved his entire life out of the house I built for him at 2 in the morning, like a man who had something to hide. The question wasn't why he left anymore. The question was what he was running from or what he was running toward. I would find out the next day when I drove to the house with the wooden cradle still in the back of my truck. The wooden cradle shifted in the truck bed as I turned onto Maple Street, and I was thinking about which corner of the nursery would get the best morning light when I saw the sign. Sold. Bright red letters on white plastic staked into the front lawn of the house I'd given my son. The house I'd emptied my savings to buy. The house I'd spent 3 months renovating with my own hands, painting every wall, sanding every floor, installing that hand-carved cradle in the nursery where my grandson would sleep. Sold. I sat in my truck unmoving for exactly 5 minutes. My hands stayed on the steering wheel. My foot stayed on the brake. The engine idled. The oak tree was still there. I had planted it 4 months ago, barely taller than my knee, pressing the soil around its roots with my own hands. It had grown maybe 3 inches since then. Still trying. Still reaching for the sky, unaware that the dream that planted it was already dead. I don't remember deciding to get out of the truck. I just found myself standing on the sidewalk staring at that sign, trying to make the letters mean something different than what they clearly said. The front door opened. A man stepped out hesitantly, mid-50s, wearing weekend clothes and an uncertain expression. Vernon Caldwell, I would later learn. 52 years old, a high school history teacher who had just purchased what he thought was a normal house in a quiet neighborhood. He had no idea he was standing in the middle of my shattered life. "Can I help you?" he asked carefully. My mouth moved. Words came out. "This is my son's house." Vernon's face shifted from caution to something that looked like pity. "I'm sorry, sir. They moved out about 3 weeks ago. Middle of the night, actually. I closed on the house last week. 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, while I was sitting in my watch shop telling myself Everett was just busy, my son was packing up the house I'd given him and selling it to a stranger. Did they?" My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Did they say where they were going?" "Chuka, California. I think the realtor mentioned something about a job opportunity. I'm sorry, I don't know much more than that. The whole transaction was very rushed." Vernon stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to do with the old man falling apart on his new sidewalk. Is there someone I can call for you?" "No," I said. "Thank you." I walked back to my truck, on legs that didn't feel attached to my body. Got in. Closed the door. Sat there staring at the steering wheel while Vernon watched from his porch, probably wondering if he should call someone anyway. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to call. Muscle memory. Father to son. The number I'd dialed 1,000 times over 39 years. It rang, and rang, and rang. I was about to hang up when he answered. "Dad?" No surprise in his voice, no guilt, just flat acknowledgement. "Where are you?" A pause. Not the pause of someone gathering courage to explain. The pause of someone deciding how much truth to bother with. "We moved to Los Angeles. Saskia got an opportunity out there. It happened pretty fast." "Fast?" My hand tightened on the phone. "How fast?" "About a month ago. We've been getting settled." A month. He'd been gone a month. Living in a different state. Starting a new life. While I sat 3 miles away in a closed watch shop telling myself he was just busy. "I'm sitting in front of the house right now," I said, my voice barely recognizable. "The house I bought you, the house I gave you. There's a sold sign in the front yard." Silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words came out broken. "I bought you this house. I planted a tree for my grandson. I spent every dollar I'd saved. Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" "It was Saskia's decision," he said, his tone still maddeningly flat. "The job was too good to pass up. We had to move quickly." "You sold the house." "We needed the money for the move, for a down payment in LA. I gave you that house, and we sold it. It was ours to sell. Your lawyer made sure of that, remember?" I closed my eyes. The air in the truck felt too thin. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked again. Why did I have to find out like this from a stranger from a sold sign? Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice carried something worse than anger, worse than guilt. It carried indifference. "You didn't need to know." 5 words. That was all it took to erase 40 years of sacrifice, a house built with love, and a grandfather's dream of watching a boy grow beneath an oak tree. "I didn't need to know," I repeated slowly, testing the words in my mouth like they were in a foreign language. "Look, Dad, I have to go. We're busy here. I'll call you when things settle down." "The wine collection," I said suddenly, the thought hitting me like cold water. "In the basement. Behind the locked door." "What about it?" "It's still there. It's still mine." "The legal writer." "I know, Dad. I remember. Your precious wine collection." "Don't worry, we didn't touch it. The new owner has the key to that room. I'm sure he'll take good care of whatever's in there." The line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the screen, showing the call had ended. Everett Harrington. Son. 39 years old. The boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for. "You didn't need to know." The morning sun caught the sold sign, making the red letters almost glow. I sat in that truck for a long time. The wooden cradle was still in the back. I hadn't even untied it yet. I didn't know where to put it anymore. But I would find out soon that I wasn't the only one watching this unfold. I don't know how long I sat in that truck, an hour, maybe 2, before someone knocked on the window. Time had stopped meaning anything. The sun had moved across the sky. The shadows of the oak tree had shifted on the lawn. My phone had buzzed twice with calls I didn't answer. The wooden cradle in the truck bed hadn't moved. Neither had I. The knock came again, gentle but persistent. I turned my head slowly, like I was moving through water. A young woman stood outside, maybe 34, with dark hair pulled back and a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore a blazer over jeans and carried a microphone with a small camera operator standing behind her. A news van was parked across the street. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said through the glass. Her voice was muffled but kind. I rolled down the window. The December air hit my face cold and sharp. "I'm Anwin Frost," she said. "I'm a reporter with Channel 7. We're doing a piece on the local housing market, the rapid turnover, how quickly homes are being bought and sold. I saw you sitting here and wondered if you might have a minute to talk." I should have said no. I should have rolled the window back up and driven away. but I was too numb to calculate what I should or shouldn't do. The words came out on their own. What do you want to know?" Her face brightened with professional relief. She gestured to the camera operator who lifted the camera to his shoulder. A small red light blinked on. "Are you the seller, the buyer?" she asked. "What brought you to this house today?" I looked at the sold sign. The red letters seemed brighter than they had hours ago. "I bought this house 4 months ago," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Flat. Empty. "I bought it for my son and his pregnant wife. I renovated it myself. Spent 3 months painting every room, sanding the floors, fixing everything that was broken." Anwen nodded encouragingly, her reporter's instinct sensing there was more. "I planted that oak tree." I continued pointing to the small tree in the yard. "So my grandson would have shade. So he'd grow up in a house his grandfather built with his own hands." The camera stayed on me. I could see my reflection in the lens. An old man in a truck talking to strangers because his son wouldn't talk to him. "And the sold sign?" Anwen asked gently. "What happened?" "They moved." 2 words. Simple. Devastating. "To California, 3 weeks ago. They sold the house I gave them and moved across the country without telling me. I found out today from the man who bought it." Anwen's professional mask slipped for just a moment. I saw something human cross her face. Pity, maybe. Or recognition of pain. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "I called my son an hour ago." Why was I still talking? Why couldn't I stop? I asked him why he didn't tell me they were leaving. You know what he said? She shook her head. He said I didn't need to know. Sometimes the truth comes out easiest when you're too broken to rehearse it, when you're too numb to calculate what you should or shouldn't say. Anwen was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her reporter voice was softer. "What was it like building this house for your family?" I looked at the oak tree again. It was so small, so fragile, still trying to grow even though the dream that planted it was gone. "I closed my watch shop to do it," I said. 40 years I spent fixing timepieces. Every dollar I saved went into this house. I thought," my voice caught. "I thought I was building a future. I thought my grandson would learn to walk on these floors. I thought he'd climb that tree someday." And now, I turned back to face the camera. Looked directly into the lens. Somewhere in my grief-fogged mind, I understood that this moment would exist beyond this conversation, that this young woman would take what I said and put it somewhere others could see it. But I didn't care. Let them see. Let everyone see what happens when you give everything to someone who treats it like nothing. "Maybe I placed my dream in the wrong person," I said. The words hung in the cold December air. The camera's red light blinked steadily. Anwen lowered her microphone slowly. She looked at me for a long moment, not as a reporter, but as a human being witnessing another human being's shattering. "Thank you for talking with me," she said finally. "I'm truly sorry for what you're going through." She walked back to her van. The camera operator followed. They drove away, and I was alone again on the street where my dreams had lived and died. I sat there a while longer. The shadows continued to lengthen. Words are like stones thrown into still water. You never know how far the ripples will travel, or whose shore they'll reach. Eventually, I started the truck and drove home. The wooden cradle shifted in the back. As I turned corners, the canvas tarp I'd wrapped it in coming loose. I'd meant to install it in the nursery that day. I'd meant to position it where the morning light would fall just right. I pulled into my driveway and sat there with the engine off, looking at my small house with its single bathroom and furnace that broke every winter. The house Margot and I had raised Everett in. The house we'd been happy in back when I still understood what happiness meant. The cradle was still in the truck bed. I didn't bring it inside. I didn't know where to put it anymore. I also didn't know that what I'd just said to that reporter would be shared millions of times before the week was over, that my face would appear on screens across the country, that strangers would cry over my story and rage on my behalf. 3 days later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. 3 days after that interview, my phone rang 16 times before breakfast, and I still didn't understand what was happening. The first call came at 6 in the morning, a producer from a morning show in New York. The second was CNN. The third was a reporter from Chicago asking if I'd seen the video. What video had I asked? Your interview, sir. It's everywhere. I didn't know what everywhere meant. I'd never been on Facebook. I'd never sent a tweet. The internet was something other people used to look up weather and buy things they didn't need. But apparently, somewhere out there in the digital wilderness, a 69-year-old man sitting in a truck talking about a wooden cradle had become news. By noon, the video had been shared 3 million times. By evening, it was 7 million. The producer who called at 6 showed up at my door at 3 with a camera crew asking if I'd go on air that night. National television. Live. What would I say? I asked. Just tell your story, she said. The way you told it to that local reporter. So I did. I sat in a television studio in Chicago that night, a small microphone clipped to my collar, bright lights making everything feel unreal. The host was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and perfect hair. She asked me to explain what happened. I told her about the house, the renovation, the oak tree, the sold sign. I kept my voice level. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just told the truth the way you'd tell someone what you had for breakfast. Mr. Harrington, she said, leaning forward with practiced empathy, are you angry at your son for what he did? I thought about that for a moment. The cameras waited. Millions of people I would never meet waited. No, I said finally. I'm just very, very tired of being surprised by people I trusted. The host's professional mask slipped for half a second. She blinked quickly like she was fighting back something real. What did you hope would happen when you built that house? I thought this would be the place my grandson called home, I said. That's all I ever wanted. I never asked to be the face of anything. I was just an old man sitting in a truck telling the truth, because I was too broken to lie anymore. But something about the way I said it, the calmness maybe, or the absence of self-pity, resonated with people who'd been through their own versions of abandonment. The clip played on news channels for a week. Social media turned me into a hashtag. Strangers argued in comment sections about whether my son was a monster or whether I was leaving something out. The nation wasn't moved because I complained. They were moved because I didn't. The letters started arriving 4 days later. The first one came to the watch shop address, forwarded by the new tenant who'd rented the space. Then 5 more. Then 20. By the end of the week, the post office called asking if I could pick up packages because they were running out of room. I drove to the post office and loaded 3 boxes into my truck, took them home and opened them one by one at my kitchen table. A woman in Florida wrote that she hadn't spoken to her daughter in 8 years. No fight, no dramatic break, just slow erosion calls that went unreturned holidays, celebrated separately, grandchildren she'd never met. I thought I was the only one, she wrote. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone. A man in Oregon sent a photo of a small oak tree in his yard. The note attached said simply, I planted one too, for my grandchildren. A couple in Michigan sent a picture of themselves standing in front of a house they'd renovated for their son. He sold it 2 months after we gave him the keys, they wrote. We never knew it happened to other people. Letter after letter. Story after story. People who'd given everything to children who treated it like nothing. Parents who'd been erased from their children's lives with the same casual cruelty Everett had shown me. Elderly individuals living alone, wondering what they'd done wrong, carrying shame that didn't belong to them. Some letters were angry on my behalf. Some were gentle, Some just said thank you without explaining why. But every single one told me the same thing: I wasn't alone. The world was full of people like me carrying identical wounds, thinking they were the only ones. One envelope contained no letter, just a photograph. A man in his 60s standing beside a grave holding a pocket watch. On the back, someone had written, "Dad wore this every day. You fixed it for him in 1987. I stared at that photograph for a long time, trying to remember. 1987. 37 years ago. How many watches had I repaired that year? Hundreds, probably. I couldn't place the face, couldn't recall the specific repair. But 2 days later, another letter arrived. This one had words. Mr. Harrington. It read, "You probably don't remember me. In 1987, I brought my father's pocket watch to your shop. It had been his father's before that. The stem was broken, the crystal cracked. You told me it would take 2 weeks and cost $120. When I came back, you only charged me $60. You said you couldn't charge full price to a veteran. My father wore that watch every single day until he died last year. He was buried with it. Thank you. Kindness is a stone you throw into water without watching where it lands, never knowing it might save someone drowning 30 years downstream." I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by letters from strangers, holding that one letter in my hands, and I understood something I hadn't understood before. My son's betrayal was enormous. It was crushing. It had shattered the life I thought I was building. But my life was bigger than his rejection. 40 years of fixing watches. 40 years of charging fair prices and doing honest work. 40 years of small kindnesses I'd forgotten the moment I extended them. And somewhere out there, people remembered. I had forgotten, but somebody remembered. The world outside my family was far kinder than the people who shared my blood. When my son finally called 10 days after the video went viral, I knew before I answered that he wasn't calling to apologize. The world outside my family had proven kinder than the people who shared my blood. Strangers sent letters. Former customers remembered watches I'd repaired decades ago. But my son, he called with rage in his voice. "You deliberately humiliated us on national television, Dad." No greeting, no acknowledgement of the months of silence that preceded this. Just accusation, sharp and immediate. "You staged the whole thing for sympathy, and now everyone thinks we're monsters." I sat at my kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear, and felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt. Just a deep, bone-tired weariness. "I didn't stage anything," I said quietly. A reporter asked me questions. I answered them. "You knew what you were doing. You made us look like villains. Do you have any idea what it's been like for us? People recognize Saskia at work. My colleagues send me the video with question marks. Our friends are asking what really happened." "What really happened?" I repeated slowly. "Tell me, Everett. What really happened?" Silence. "I bought you a house." I continued, my voice still calm, still level. "I spent every dollar I'd saved. I renovated it with my own hands. You sold it without telling me and moved across the country. When I asked why you didn't inform me, you said I didn't need to know. Did I get any of that wrong?" More silence. "Did I say anything that wasn't true?" The line went dead. He'd hung up. I set the phone down carefully and stared at it for a long time, wondering when my son had learned that inconvenient truths could be erased by simply refusing to acknowledge them. Why is it that the people who hurt you the most are always the ones who demand you pretend it never happened? 3 days later, Saskia called. Her approach was different. No rage, just desperation wrapped in politeness. She'd almost called me by the wrong name. We'd known each other for 5 years. I'd given her a house. She couldn't remember what to call me. "What can I do for you, Saskia? I need to talk to you about the video." Her voice was tight with controlled emotion. People at work recognized me. My manager asked about it. HR mentioned that negative publicity can affect team dynamics. This is affecting my career, Leland. You have to understand. I see. I'm not calling to be difficult. I'm just asking, could you take it down, or maybe issue a correction? A statement saying things were taken out of context, or that there were misunderstandings on both sides. Correct what? I asked. What did I say that was wrong? She made a small, frustrated sound. It's not about wrong or right. It's about, optics. About our family being portrayed in a certain light. Not our family, I said. Interesting phrase. What? You keep using that phrase. Our family. I kept thinking, when did that phrase stop including me? She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened slightly. You're not being fair. We had to make difficult choices. The opportunity in Los Angeles was, you didn't have to sell the house I gave you. We needed the money for the down payment. You didn't have to move in the middle of the night without telling anyone. The timing was, you didn't have to tell me I didn't need to know. Silence. That's what this comes down to, doesn't it? I said. Not whether I told the truth, but whether the truth is comfortable for you. People are judging us, she said, and her voice cracked slightly. Complete strangers are sending me messages, calling me names. Our friends are asking questions we can't answer. You don't understand what it's like to be on the other side of this. You're right, I said. I don't understand what it's like to sell a house someone built for you and then get upset when they mention it happened. Another long pause. So you won't take it down? No, even though it's hurting us. You hurt me first, Saskia. You just didn't have to watch it go viral. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat alone in my kitchen afterward, holding the phone, thinking about what she'd said. She was worried about what her co-workers thought of her, about how the video affected her career, about strangers sending messages. Not once did she ask how I was doing. I thought about taking down the video. I could do it. Contact the news station, request they remove it, issue some vague statement about privacy and healing. The whole thing would fade eventually. People would move on to the next viral moment. But I couldn't do it. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I enjoyed seeing them uncomfortable. But because if I took it down, I would be telling the world that truth should be hidden whenever it makes someone uncomfortable. And I couldn't live with that. Margot's photograph sat on the shelf above the kitchen table, the same one I'd kept in the watch shop for years. She was smiling in it, caught mid-laugh at something I'd said off camera. We'd been married 28 years when that photo was taken. 6 years before she died. A clock that shows the wrong time is worse than no clock at all, she used to say. It was one of her favorite expressions, something her father had told her. If you don't know the time, you know you don't know. But if you trust a clock that's wrong, you'll be late to everything that matters. I'd built my life on that principle. 40 years of honest work. 40 years of fixing what was broken and charging fair prices. 40 years of telling customers the truth about whether their watch could be saved or whether it was time to let it go. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just is. And hiding it to spare someone's feelings doesn't make you kind, it makes you complicit in the lie. I never disagreed with you, I said to Margot's photograph. Not once. The phone sat silent on the table. My son wasn't going to call back. Saskia wasn't going to apologize. They were going to live in Los Angeles and build their lives and raise my grandson without me angry that I'd told people what they'd done instead of being ashamed of doing it. But I was about to learn that my refusal to take down that video was only the beginning of what would come to light. The voice on the phone was careful and polite. Mr. Harrington, I think we found something that belongs to you. 3 weeks had passed since I'd refused to take down the video. 3 weeks of waiting for the other consequences to arrive. And now here was Vernon Caldwell, the history teacher, who'd bought my son's house, calling with news that made my heart stop. "We've been renovating the basement," he said. "Wanted to create an entertainment room for the family. The construction crew was removing an old wall panel yesterday and they found—" He paused. "They found a door. Steel. Heavy. With a combination lock. My attorney looked at the purchase contract this morning and found something called a rider." My throat tightened. "What did the rider say?" "It states clearly that a wine collection in the basement remains the personal property of the original donor. That's you, Mr. Harrington. The crew chief wanted to cut through the lock, but I told him to stop immediately. If it's yours, I'm not touching it." I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. The legal rider. The protection Garrett had insisted on. The thing my son had signed without reading twice. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. Vernon was waiting on the front porch when I pulled up. The oak tree in the yard had survived the winter, bare branches reaching toward the gray January sky. It was taller than I remembered. Still growing. We didn't speak as we walked through the house to the basement. Vernon had done good work, new paint, better lighting. The space felt clean and finished. 3 men in work clothes stood near the exposed wall section tools set aside waiting. The steel door looked exactly as I'd left it months ago. Combination lock intact. No one had forced it. No one had tried. "Thank you for calling me," I said to Vernon. He nodded. "It's yours." The contract was clear. The legal rider had worked. My attorney's foresight had protected what 35 years of marriage had built. My son had signed away any claim to this room without ever asking what was inside. I stepped forward and entered the combination. 6 numbers. Margot's birthday followed by mine. The lock clicked. The heavy door swung open on perfectly balanced hinges. The temperature system was still running, humming softly in the background, at precisely 55 degrees. Over 400 bottles rested on wooden racks I'd installed myself 3 years ago. Labels faced out, organized by region and vintage. Everything exactly as I'd left it. Opening that steel door wasn't just revealing bottles. It was opening a time capsule of every year Margot and I built a life together, every milestone marked and sealed and waiting. "The temperature system is still running flawlessly," I said quietly. Over 400 bottles. 35 years of anniversaries. Vernon stood in the doorway behind me. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, didn't calculate values or make jokes about expensive wine. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, offering the respectful silence of a man who understood he was witnessing something sacred. A stranger had more respect for what was in that room than my own son ever did. I walked along the racks, slowly reading labels in my own handwriting. A 1985 Chateau Margaux from the year Everett graduated high school. A 1990 Pétrus I'd planned to open at his wedding. A 1978 Romani Conti from the night Margot beat cancer the first time. Bottle after bottle, each one marking a moment that mattered. My wife and I started collecting these the year we got married. I told Vernon, though he hadn't asked. Every anniversary, every milestone, we'd find something special. She died 11 years ago. I kept collecting anyway. Couldn't seem to stop. "It's beautiful," Vernon said. "I mean that. Not the value, just the care you took, the meaning behind it." I picked up a bottle from 1992. The label read, "Margot's 47th birthday. She laughed so hard at dinner she cried." I'd written that in pen 23 years ago. I could still hear her laughter. "I need to get this appraised," I said. "Properly documented. Do you mind if I arrange that?" "It's your property, Mr. Harrington. Take your time." 1 week later, Martin Ashford arrived at the house with a leather valuation case and 3 decades of expertise reading labels I'd written by hand. He was 61 years old, a certified wine appraiser and auction house consultant who'd spent his career evaluating collections for estate sales and insurance purposes. He worked methodically, photographing each bottle, checking vintages against market databases, making notes in neat handwriting. Vernon had given us privacy, retreating upstairs while Martin conducted his audit. "Mr. Harrington," Martin said, after 2 hours his voice filled with professional awe. "This 1978 Domaine de la Romanée-Conti alone is worth $8,000. You have multiple bottles from that vintage. And this 1990 Petrus." He shook his head slowly. "This is museum-quality preservation. What is the price of 35 years? Not the dollars an appraiser assigns, but the quiet accumulation of love marked bottle by bottle, year by year, until you have a room full of proof that your life meant something. The complete collection," Martin said, finally closing his tablet and meeting my eyes, "appraises at $2,150,000. I sat down on Vernon's basement stairs. $2 million. Margot and I had built $2 million worth of memories, one bottle at a time, and I'd protected it with a legal rider my son had signed without asking a single question. The news exploded within hours. Martin's appraisal report went to insurance companies. Insurance companies filed paperwork. Reporters who'd covered the original viral video started making calls. By the next morning, my name was on the front page again. Now, secret wine cellar worth over $2 million, forgotten in sold house. Viral grandpa's hidden fortune, the collection his son never asked about. $2.15 million in rare wine protected by legal clause, abandoned son never read. The story resurged across every media outlet. The father who'd been abandoned by his son suddenly had a fortune his son had signed away without knowing it existed. The narrative shifted from sad to stunning to almost poetic justice. My phone started ringing again. Reporters wanting interviews. Wine collectors making offers. Auction houses proposing sales. And mixed in with all those unfamiliar numbers was one I recognized too well. My son's number. Calling again and again. My son was about to learn what he'd signed away without asking. After Martin Ashford left with his valuation documents and the news crews packed their cameras, I asked Vernon if I could stay in the cellar alone for a while. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be upstairs if you need anything." The steel door closed behind me with a soft, final sound. The temperature system hummed its steady 55-degree rhythm. A single work light hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the racks. 400 bottles resting in the dark, waiting. $2.15 million, Martin had said. But he didn't understand what he was appraising. You can't put a price on memory. You can only count the bottles that hold it. I started at the beginning. The first rack. The first bottle. 1989. A Bordeaux moderately expensive for a watchmaker's budget. The label was in my handwriting, younger and steadier than it is now. Our wedding day, June 17th. I remembered buying it. The store clerk thought I was crazy spending that much on wine when Margot and I barely had furniture in our apartment. But she'd smiled when I brought it home, said we'd open it on our 10th anniversary. We never did. Kept saving it for something more special. Turns out marriage itself was the special thing. The 7th bottle. A California Cabernet from 1992. Everett is born, July 3rd. Margot came home from the hospital today. I held that bottle for a long time, feeling its weight, its perfect temperature. My son had been 7 pounds, 4 ounces. He had Margot's eyes and my stubborn chin. I'd bought this bottle at a liquor store on my way home from the hospital, grinning like an idiot, telling the owner I'd just become a father. The 19th bottle, 1997. A burgundy expensive, the most I'd ever spent at that point. 5 years, cancer-free. The doctor said she beat it. Thank God. Margot had cried when I brought it home. Said I shouldn't have spent that much. But how do you not celebrate when the woman you love survives cancer? How do you not mark that moment with something permanent? Something that will last as long as you do. Time doesn't stop. We just find ways to trap it, seal it in glass and cork and labels written in our own shaking hand, proof that we were here, that the years meant something. I walked the length of the racks slowly. 35 years of anniversaries. 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Margot's 50th birthday. The year I won a restoration award from the Watchmakers Guild. The night Everett graduated college. The day we paid off our mortgage. Some bottles were expensive. Some were modest. The price didn't matter. What mattered was the moment each one marked the reason I'd walked into a store and said, I need something to remember this day. Bottle after bottle. Year after year. A life measured not in heartbeats or paychecks, but in carefully chosen vintages stored at perfect temperature, waiting for occasions that never quite arrived, because we were always saving them for something more important than ordinary happiness. At the end of the final rack in the corner, where the work light barely reached, sat one bottle different from all the others. The label was newer. The handwriting was shakier, written just 18 months ago when I'd learned Saskia was pregnant. For my grandson, it read, Open when you're ready, a 2008 Napa Valley Cabernet. Not the most expensive bottle in the collection, but carefully chosen. Something that would age well. Something that would still be perfect in 18 years when a young man old enough to appreciate it would sit with his grandfather and hear stories. I was going to bring him here when he turned 18. Open this door together. Tell him the story of every single bottle. Show him the proof that his grandparents had built a life worth remembering, that love could be measured in moments important enough to seal in glass. That was the real gift. Not the house, not the money. But this standing in a climate-controlled room with a young man who carried my blood, sharing 3 decades of stories. He was too young to remember, but old enough to understand. I'd imagined it so many times. Him asking about his grandmother. Me pulling out the bottle from her 50th birthday and telling him how she'd laughed until she cried at the surprise party. Him asking what I did for a living. Me showing him the bottle I'd bought when the Watchmakers Guild gave me their restoration award. Him understanding finally that a life doesn't have to be famous or wealthy to matter. It just has to be lived with intention. That was what I'd wanted to give him. Not inheritance, not assets, but connection. History. The knowledge that he came from people who marked their joy, who celebrated survival, who understood that some moments are too important to let pass without recognition. I held the bottle for a long time. Then I set it back in its place. It wasn't time yet. Maybe it would never be time. But I couldn't bring myself to move it. The light above me flickered slightly. The temperature system clicked off, then on again, maintaining its perfect consistency. These bottles had been here through my son's betrayal, through the sale of the house, through months of silence and abandonment. They'd remained exactly as I'd left them, waiting for someone who would never come. $2.15 million. Martin's appraisal would make headlines. Reporters would call it a fortune. My son would see that number and think about money he'd signed away, but he would never understand what he'd actually lost. He'd lost the wedding day bottle, the cancer survival bottle, the birth announcement bottle. He'd lost 35 years of his parents' life crystallized in glass and cork, each one a story he would never hear, each one a moment he would never understand mattered. He'd lost the bottle marked for his son, the one that said, For my grandson, open when you're ready. He'd lost the 18-year future I'd imagined, the moment of connection that would have made all of this mean something beyond its price tag. I turned off the work light, closed the steel door, heard the lock click into place. Vernon was waiting in his kitchen upstairs. "You okay?" he asked. "Thank you for protecting this," I said. "More than you know." I drove home alone. The steel door was locked again behind me. 35 years of my life sitting in the dark, waiting for a boy who would never come. But my son was about to learn exactly what he'd given up without ever asking. 2 days after the appraisal hit the news, someone rang my doorbell at 8 in the morning. I'd been expecting it. The repeated phone calls I hadn't answered. The voicemails I'd deleted without listening. I knew my son would come eventually. What I didn't know was whether he'd come as my son or as someone who'd learned about $2.15 million. I opened the door. Everett stood on my porch. Saskia beside him, her arms crossed over her chest. Behind them, I could see a rental car and my driveway luggage still visible through the back window. They'd flown in from Los Angeles and come straight here, hadn't even checked into a hotel first. No smile, no greeting, no acknowledgement that we hadn't seen each other in 8 months, or that the last time we'd spoken, he'd hung up on me. Everett's first words weren't, "Hello, Dad." They weren't, "How are you?" They weren't even, "We need to talk." No, "Where is the wine cellar?" Not a question, a demand. I stood there in my doorway looking at my son, this 39-year-old man. I'd raised this person I'd given everything to, and felt something inside me go very still and very cold. "Hello, son," I said quietly. "Come in." I swung the door wider and stepped back. They walked past me without another word. No hug, no hand on my shoulder. Just straight into my living room, like they were entering a business meeting. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't say hello. The first words out of his mouth were about money. I had been waiting for him to surprise me. He did, just not in the way I had hoped. I closed the door and followed them into the living room. They didn't sit. Just stood there in the middle of the space where Margot and I had raised Everett, where we'd celebrated his birthdays and watched him open Christmas presents and taught him to tie his shoes. "The wine cellar," Everett said again. "The news said it's worth over $2 million. Where is it?" "It's in the basement of the house I gave you," I said. "The house you sold." His jaw tightened. "You hid this from us. I protected it. You never told us about a $2 million wine collection. If we'd known," he stopped, then started again, his voice rising. "If we'd known about that collection, we never would have sold that house. You deliberately stayed quiet so we'd lose it. You let us sell without saying a word." I sat down slowly in the armchair that had been Margot's favorite. My hands rested on the worn armrests where her hands used to rest. I looked at my son, this stranger in my living room, and felt nothing but tired. "Did you ever ask me what was behind that steel door?" Silence. "Spayance. When you signed the deed transfer." I continued, my voice level. "There was a rider, a legal document explicitly stating that something in the basement remained my property. You signed it. Did you ask what that something was?" Everett's face flushed. "The lawyer said it was, he mentioned something about." "Did you ask?" "It didn't seem important at the time. It didn't seem important." I let those words hang in the air. "You signed paperwork giving you a house worth $250,000, and there was a clause protecting my separate property, and you didn't think it was important enough to ask what that property was." Saskia spoke for the first time. "It seemed like personal effects. Photos, maybe, sentimental items, not a fortune." "You assumed," I said. "You didn't ask. You took a house I bought for you, renovated with my own hands, and you didn't ask a single question about what I might be keeping for myself. Because we trusted you." Everett said, his voice sharp now. "We thought if it was important, you'd tell us." "The way I told you," I was planting an oak tree for my grandson. The way I told you, I'd spent 3 months making that house perfect. The way I told you, I'd closed my watch shop to focus on building your future. He had no answer for that. You signed the writer's son. You knew there was something I kept separate. You read the words, or at least you should have read them before signing. You just never asked what it was. You didn't ask because you didn't care. And you didn't care because you never thought I had anything worth caring about. That's not fair, isn't it? I leaned forward slightly. When's the last time you asked me anything about my life, about what I did with my time after your mother died, about why I collected wine or what those bottles meant to me? When's the last time you treated me like a person instead of someone who existed to give you things? Saskia shifted uncomfortably. This isn't about your feelings. This is about a major asset that I protected with a legal document you signed without reading. I finished. That's what this is about. Not hidden assets. Not deliberate deception. Just a father who knew his son well enough to protect what mattered. How well do you know the people you love when you never ask them questions, when you sign documents without reading, when you take gifts without wondering what they cost? We have rights, Everett said, but his voice had lost its certainty. That collection was in the house. It should have been disclosed. It was disclosed in the writer you signed. The collection was explicitly stated as my separate property. Your attorney saw it. My attorney wrote it. You acknowledged it with your signature. The only thing that wasn't disclosed was its value, and that's because you never asked. You could have told us. I could have. I agreed. The same way you could have told me you were moving to Los Angeles. The same way you could have asked if there was anything in that basement worth knowing about before you sold the house. The same way you could have treated the gift I gave you with enough respect to wonder what I might be keeping for myself. Everett looked at his wife. She looked at her shoes. Neither of them had an answer. Nobody had an answer for that. Saskia broke the silence the next morning with 3 words that chilled me to the bone. We should sue. They'd spent the night at a hotel. At 8:30, my doorbell rang. Saskia stood on my porch, Everett behind her, with his hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. Can we come in? Not really a question. I stepped aside. They walked into my kitchen. Saskia set her designer handbag on the table, the same table where Margot used to serve Sunday breakfast. The leather bag sat there like an invasion. I've been thinking about this all night, Saskia said. The wine collection. It was in the house. It should have been part of the property disclosure when we sold. The buyer should have been informed about a $2 million asset. It wasn't part of the property, I said. The legal writer, the technicality doesn't change that a valuable collection was hidden in the basement. If we'd disclosed it, the house would have been worth more. We lost money because of incomplete disclosure. You want me to sue Vernon Caldwell, I said slowly. The man who bought your house legally. For restitution, for the value we lost. He got a house with a $2 million asset he didn't pay for. The audacity took my breath away. Vernon, who'd called me immediately when he found the door. Vernon, who'd stood in respectful silence while I walked through my memories. He didn't get anything that belonged to you, I said. The collection was mine, protected by contract. But it affected the sale price, Saskia pressed. If potential buyers had known, they would have seen the writer stating it wasn't included, which is exactly what Vernon saw, which is what you would have seen if you'd read what you signed. Her jaw tightened. This is about protecting our family's interests. That collection represents our heritage. Your heritage ended when you sold the house at 2 a.m. without telling me. You don't get to claim family legacy now that you've learned what it's worth. If you won't sue him, she said, her tone shifting to threat. We'll have to consider our own legal options. Challenging the writer, claiming undue influence or incomplete disclosure. And do what you need to do, I said. I'm consulting my attorney. I walked to the door and held it open. Everett looked up, met my eyes for half a second, then followed his wife out without saying a word. An hour later, I sat across from Garrett Holbrook in his office. They want you to sue the current homeowner, Garrett repeated, for restitution, claiming the wine collection should have been disclosed as part of the property value. Garrett leaned back in his chair. That's creative, also completely baseless. The collection was explicitly excluded from the transfer. The writer couldn't be clearer. But could they challenge the writer itself? Let me show you something. Garrett turned to his computer, typed, then reached for his printer. The machine whirred to life, mechanical and methodical, producing sheets that felt like they carried the weight of truth itself. He handed me 3 printed pages. I had email correspondence from last August, 5 months before the house sale, when we finalized the deed transfer paperwork. I looked at the first page. An email from Garrett's office to Everett dated August 20th. Subject line, Property Transfer Rider Wine Collection Clarification. The email was detailed, professional, clear. Dear Mr. Harrington, per our conversation, this email confirms the legal rider attached to the property deed transfer. The wine collection housed in the basement climate-controlled room remains the personal property of Leland Harrington. This collection may not be sold, moved, altered, or claimed as part of the transferred property. Upon Mr. Harrington's passing, the collection will be distributed according to his will. This rider was included specifically to protect Mr. Harrington's property rights. Please confirm you have read and understood these terms. The second page was Everett's reply, dated August 21st. Got it. Understood. Thanks for clarifying, Everett. 3 sentences. Casual. Acknowledging receipt and understanding. The third page was another email from Garrett's office confirming the exchange would be maintained in the case file. I sat there holding the papers, reading them again. He knew, I said finally. Hi to see you. He knew everything, Garrett confirmed. We explained it in writing. He acknowledged understanding. This is explicit confirmation that your son was fully informed about the wine collection protection clause before the property transfer. 5 months before they sold the house. Correct. Which means when he came to your door yesterday demanding to know where the wine cellar was, he was lying. He knew exactly where it was, what it was, and that it wasn't his. He just didn't know what it was worth. The printer had gone quiet. The office was silent except for the soft hum of the heating system. I stared at my son's email, got it, understood, and felt something break inside me. He hadn't forgotten. He hadn't misunderstood. He'd known from the beginning that the collection was mine, protected by law. He'd signed paperwork acknowledging that. He'd confirmed his understanding in writing, and then he'd shown up at my door, acting like I'd hidden it from him. Calculated, deliberate. A performance designed to make me feel guilty for protecting what was mine. Can I have copies of these? I asked. Garrett slid them across the desk. Already printed for you. If they pursue legal action, these emails make their case impossible. I drove home with the papers in the passenger seat. Every stoplight I glanced at them. Got it. Understood. 3 words that proved everything. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Vernon's name on the screen. I heard about the situation, he said when I answered. Your son and his wife. The lawsuit threat. News travels fast. Small town. I have an idea that might solve everything. Can I come over tonight? Vernon stood on my porch that evening holding a bouquet of white lilies, Margot's favorite, and an offer I never expected to hear. I hope I'm not intruding, he said when I opened the door. I know it's late, but I've been thinking about your situation all day. I stepped aside and let him in. He'd never been to my home before. We'd only met twice, once when he found the sold sign, once when he discovered the wine cellar. But something about the way he carried those lilies, careful and respectful, told me this wasn't about property rights or legal technicalities. We sat in my living room. He placed the flowers on the coffee table between us. "These were your wife's favorite?" he asked. "How did you know?" "There's a photograph in the house, in the hallway. I haven't taken it down yet. She's holding white lilies." I'd forgotten about that photo. Margot at her sister's wedding 20 years ago. I'd hung it in the hallway of the house I'd given away. "I heard about this morning," Vernon said carefully. "Your son and his wife, the lawsuit threat. Small-town people talk at the coffee shop. They want me to sue you," I said. "For restitution. They think you got a house with a hidden fortune." "I know." He looked down at his hands. "That's why I'm here. I spoke with a real estate attorney this afternoon. There might be a way to resolve this. An arrangement where I could return the wine collection to you. Transfer it back legally so it's physically in your possession instead of mine." I stared at him. "You want to give me back the collection? When I want to help resolve this family conflict. The collection was always yours. I was just housing it technically. If moving it back to your property would end the dispute, I'm willing to do that." The white lilies sat between us. Their scent too sweet, too much like the funeral. Too much like loss dressed up as something beautiful. "You'd do that," I said slowly. "You'd go through the legal process, the logistics, just to help me avoid a fight with my son." For Margot," he said quietly. "I never met her. But I live in the house she was supposed to see, filled with grandchildren. I found your wine collection, 35 years of memories you built with her. The least I can do is help protect what she meant to you." Footsteps on my porch. The doorbell. I stood and opened it to find Everett and Saskia standing there. They must have seen Vernon's car in the driveway. "We need to talk," Everett said. They walked in without invitation, saw Vernon sitting in my living room. Saskia's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Interesting that you're here." Vernon stood. "I was just discussing options to return the wine collection." Everett interrupted. "Good. That's exactly what needs to happen." "I haven't agreed to anything," I said. Everett turned to me. "Dad, this is the solution. Mr. Caldwell returns the collection, we can all move forward. I sold the house, Vernon. That decision is final." Silence filled the room. Vernon looked between us, understanding, dawning that this was about more than wine. "Dad, if there's a way to," Everett started. "I wasn't talking to you," I said, cutting him off. My eyes stayed on Vernon. "I appreciate what you're offering. I truly do. But I made the decision to sell that house. I made the decision to let go of that property and everything it represented. I'm not taking it back." Vernon's eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I couldn't help." "You already have, more than you know." He shook my hand and left, closing the door gently behind him. The lilies remained on the coffee table. Everett and Saskia stood in my living room, and for the first time since they'd arrived, they had nothing to say. Vernon's offer had been their last hope, and I'd refused it. "We should go," Saskia finally said. They walked to the front door. Everett stopped on the threshold, turned back. "You're making a mistake, Dad." I looked at my son. At this 39-year-old man who'd taken everything I'd given him and treated it like it was owed. Who'd signed documents without reading them. Who'd moved in the middle of the night without telling me. Who'd shown up demanding wine he'd known from the beginning wasn't his. "I made one mistake," I said quietly. "I won't make another." "What mistake?" he asked. Through the window behind him, I could see Saskia's hand reach across to grip his shoulder, comfort or control. I couldn't tell anymore. Wani, I spent 39 years thinking that giving you everything would teach you to appreciate something, I said. That was my mistake. I won't compound it by giving you anything else. Let's go, Saskia said, her voice tight. They walked to their rental car. Got in. The engine started. Taillights glowed red in my driveway, then pulled away down the street. I watched from my doorway until they disappeared around the corner. The house was very quiet. The lilies were still on the coffee table. Margot's favorite flowers brought by a stranger who'd shown more respect for her memory than her own son had. I closed the door, locked it, walked to the phone. Garrett answered on the second ring. I need you to do something for me, I said. I want to gift the wine collection, all of it, before Everett tries anything else. Garrett talked me out of gifting the collection, too vulnerable to challenge, he said, but selling it outright was legal, clean, and mine to do. If you gift it to anyone, he'd explained on the phone, Everett can argue undue influence, claim you were pressured or not thinking clearly, but a straight sale. That's your absolute right as the owner. He has no standing to challenge it, so selling it was. All 400 bottles. The entire collection Margot and I had built over 35 years. I'd hung up with Garrett and sat there in the dark, trying to feel something about that decision. Relief, maybe. Or loss. But all I felt was tired. Past midnight now. The house was silent. I sat in my study with Margot's wedding photograph propped on the desk, the same photo I'd kept in the watch shop for years. She was 26 in it, laughing at something off camera, her veil catching the light. Garrett says I should sell it, I told her. All 400 bottles. Over $2 million, Margot. Can you imagine $2 million from wine we bought to celebrate being alive? She smiled back at me, frozen at 26, forever young. What would you want me to do with that kind of money? The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But sometimes asking the question was enough. I know what Everett wanted. I continued. He wanted it for himself. Wanted to take what we built and turn it into. What a down payment, investment capital, something to brag about to his colleagues. I leaned back in my chair. The study felt smaller at night, the walls closer, the shadows deeper. But what would you want, Margot? If you were here sitting across from me right now, what would you say to do with $2 million? Margot's eyes in the photograph seemed to look past me toward the corner of the study where the wooden cradle sat gathering dust, the one I'd carved for my grandson. The one that had been in the back of my truck the day I found the sold sign. The one I'd brought inside and set in the corner, because I didn't know where else to put something made for a child I'd never meet, waiting for a grandchild who would grow up 3,000 miles away, raised by parents who'd erased me from their lives like I was never there. How well do we know the people we love when we never think to ask what they actually need, when we assume our gifts speak for themselves, when we build futures for people who never wanted the life we imagined? Before I tell you what I decided to do with that money, are you still with me? Comment A. If you think I should keep it for myself, or B. If you think Margot would want something different. Add one reason why. Please note. The next part includes some recreated details for storytelling. The message is what stays with you. I stood up, walked to the corner. The question shifted in my mind. Not what do I do, but what would Margot want? And suddenly I knew. Margot had spent her whole life teaching preschool. 28 years in a classroom with 4-year-olds coming home exhausted and happy, telling me stories about kids who needed help. Families, struggling parents, working 2 jobs just to keep their children fed and housed. She'd spent her own money on classroom supplies, bought winter coats for kids who didn't have them, paid for field trip fees when parents couldn't afford them. She says every child deserves someone paying attention, she used to say. That's all they need, just someone who shows up. I picked up the phone, dialed Vernon's number. It rang 4 times before he answered, his voice thick with sleep. Hi, Vernon, it's Leland. I know it's late, I'm sorry, but I need your help with something. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm selling the collection, all of it, and I know exactly what to do with the money. Silence on the other end, then tell me. I want to create a scholarship fund, in Margot's name, for kids whose parents are gone or can't be there for them. Kids in foster care, kids who lost parents, kids whose families are broken. I want to give them what my grandson won't have: someone paying attention, someone showing up. The line was quiet for a long moment. The Margot Harrington Scholarship. Vernon said, finally testing the words. For children who need someone to show up. She spent her whole life showing up for other people's children, I said. She loved our son, but she also loved every kid who walked into her classroom. She never stopped believing that every child deserved a chance. How much are you thinking? All of it. The full sale price. Whatever the collection brings. Every dollar goes into an endowment. It keeps running after I'm gone. It keeps helping kids long after both of us are dead. Another silence. When Vernon spoke again, his voice was thick. Margot would be proud of you. Something in my chest loosened. The weight I'd been carrying for months, the anger, the betrayal, the grief of losing my son while he was still alive, began finally to lift. I need your help setting it up, I said. The legal structure, the foundation paperwork, making sure it's done right. I'll make some calls tomorrow, Vernon said. We'll get this done properly. The Margot Harrington Scholarship Fund. Thank you. Thank you, he said, for trusting me with this, for letting me be part of something that matters. I hung up and sat back down at my desk. Margot's photograph still smiled at me, frozen at 26 forever, the woman who believed every child deserved someone paying attention. The wooden cradle sat in the corner. It would never hold my grandson. But maybe, just maybe, the money from that wine collection could help dozens of other children. Hundreds if the endowment was structured right. Kids who needed coats and books and someone to believe in them. Everett had demanded the collection for himself. Vernon had offered to return it, to keep peace. I was going to sell it and give every dollar away. And for the first time since I'd seen that sold sign, I felt like I was doing exactly what Margot would have wanted. Vernon signed the purchase agreement first, his signature authorizing a wire transfer of $2.15 million for a wine collection he would never drink. 1 week had passed since that late-night phone call. 1 week of meetings with Garrett, paperwork with the Community Foundation, phone calls with attorneys who specialized in charitable trusts. 1 week of moving forward with what Margot would have wanted. We sat in Garrett's office, Vernon, Garrett, and me. The purchase agreement was straightforward. Vernon would buy the entire collection at the appraised value. The funds would transfer directly to my personal account. A confidentiality clause ensured zero notification to any other parties. The buyer is me, Vernon said, signing the final page. I want you to know that. I'm not brokering this to a collector or an auction house. I'm purchasing it myself. Margot would want family to preserve this. I looked at him. This history teacher who'd bought my son's house, who'd found my wine cellar and called me immediately, who'd offered to help resolve a family conflict that had nothing to do with him. You're going to keep it? I asked. I'm going to care for it, he said. The way it should have been cared for all along. And when I'm gone, it'll go to someone who understands what it means. Garrett slid the papers across to me. The confidentiality clause ensures no notification to other parties. Your son won't know about this transaction unless you choose to tell him. I signed my name. Watched Vernon write a check for $2.15 million. Watched Garrett witness both signatures. "I won't be keeping it, Vernon," I said. "Any of it." He nodded slowly. "I know. Margot's scholarship. Every dollar." The wire transfer cleared that afternoon. I sat in my kitchen watching my phone, waiting for the bank notification. When it came, wire received $2,150,000. I stared at the screen for a long time. $2 million. More money than I'd earned in 40 years of fixing watches. Sitting in my account for exactly as long as it took me to give it away. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Garrett. "It's in my account. Draw up the donation paperwork." The second was to Patricia Morrison. Patricia Morrison was 53, the executive director of the Community Foundation, and she'd spent 20 years connecting donors with causes. But she'd never received a call quite like this one. "Ms. Morrison, my name is Leland Harrington. I want to establish a scholarship foundation. The full amount. All of it." "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrington, could you clarify what you mean by all of it?" $2.15 million. "I want to donate the entire amount to create an endowed scholarship fund for children who've lost their parents or can't be with them. Foster children, kids in broken families. I want it to help them go to college." Silence on the other end. "Then, Mr. Harrington, this would change lives. Dozens of lives. This would be one of the largest single donations we've ever received. It's what my wife would have wanted." "When were you thinking?" "Today. I want to start the paperwork today. For the first time since Margot died, I felt something other than weight. I felt purpose." Patricia came to my house 2 hours later with forms and projections and estimates of how many students could be helped. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Saskia's designer handbag had sat like an invasion, and planned how Margot's name would live on. With an endowment this size, Patricia explained, structured properly, we can help 15 to 20 students every year, forever. The principal stays invested, the returns fund the scholarships, and it never runs out. The Margot Harrington Scholarship, I said, testing the words. For children who need someone to show up, Patricia added, reading my notes. That's beautiful, Garrett called that evening. In 30 years of practice, this is the most generous thing I've seen. Most people would keep at least some of it. Most people didn't marry Margot, I said. 3 weeks later, the Margot Harrington Scholarship Foundation was officially established. Patricia handled the announcement, the press released, the coordination with local media. I stayed out of it. This wasn't about me. This was about making sure Margot's name meant something to people who'd never met her. The newspaper arrived on a Thursday morning. I was in my watch shop, the one I'd closed a year ago, the one I still visited sometimes, just to sit among the silent clocks. The headline was small in the local philanthropy section, New Scholarship Fund to help children who lost parents. I read the article slowly. The Margot Harrington Scholarship Foundation, established with a $2.15 million endowment, will provide college scholarships to children who have lost parents or are in foster care. The fund is named for Margot Harrington, a beloved local preschool teacher who spent 28 years working with young children. Every child deserves someone paying attention, Mrs. Harrington often said. The scholarship will help ensure that students without parental support can still pursue higher education. The newspaper ink smudged under my thumb as I traced her name printed in clean serif type that made it look permanent, official, real. They spelled your name right, Margot, I said to the empty shop. They got everything right. 11 years. She'd been gone 11 years. And in all that time, her name had appeared in print exactly twice, once in her obituary, once in Everett's wedding announcement as mother of the groom. Now it was here, in the newspaper, attached to something that would help children for generations, something that would make a difference long after both of us were forgotten. You're finally getting what you deserved, I whispered. And then finally, I let myself cry. Not from grief, not from loss, but from the knowledge that the woman I'd loved for 34 years was being recognized for who she really was. A teacher, a believer in children, someone who showed up. I folded the newspaper carefully and placed it in the drawer next to Margot's photograph. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. For the first time in a year, I felt like I'd done something right. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Dad, we need to talk. Celeste is asking about you. Everett." I stared at the message. After everything, the lies, the demands, the lawsuit threats, the calculated manipulation, he was reaching out because his daughter was asking questions. After everything, he still didn't understand. 3 months after the scholarship announcement, I sat across from Garrett and signed the papers that removed my son's name from my will entirely. Everett's text had sat unanswered on my phone for weeks. "Dad, we need to talk. Celeste is asking about you." I'd read it a dozen times. Never replied. If he wanted to use his daughter as leverage to get money, he thought I still had, he could keep waiting, but I couldn't wait to protect her from him. "You're certain about removing Everett entirely?" Garrett asked, sliding the new will across his desk. I picked up the pen. My granddaughter deserves protection, from her own father if necessary. The document was thorough. Everything I owned, the house, my savings, whatever remained, would go to the Margot Harrington Scholarship Foundation upon my death. The foundation would continue in perpetuity, helping children long after I was gone. But there was one exception, the trust for Celeste. Garrett said, pointing to page 7. $50,000 held in trust until she turns 21. She gets it directly. No parental access, no parental control, no way for Everett or Saskia to touch it. And if they try, the trust activates at 21, regardless of parental consent or circumstances. If they try to challenge it, contest it, or interfere in any way, the trust language specifically states that such action will be considered evidence of the exact behavior the trust was designed to protect against. I signed my name on every page that required it, initialed the margins, signed the final attestation. Signing away, my son felt like closing a door I'd held open for 39 years, waiting for someone who was never going to walk through it. Done," Garrett said, witnessing my signature. "This is now your legal will. Everett is removed. Celeste is protected. The foundation is secured." I drove home feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. Everett's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Dad." His voice was cautious. "I got your address from Vernon Caldwell. I know you've been back in Illinois. Can we meet? There are things we need to discuss." "What things?" "The wine collection. The sale. I heard some things and I think we should talk." So he'd found out. Someone had told him about the sale. He was calling now, months later, because he thought there was money to claim. "Come to my house tomorrow," I said. 2 o'clock. He arrived exactly on time. Pulled up in a rental car, came to the door alone. No Saskia this time. Just my son, looking older than I remembered, standing on my porch like a stranger. "Thanks for seeing me," he said. I let him in. We sat in the living room. He looked around like he was cataloging assets, calculating values. "I heard you sold the collection," he said finally, "for over $2 million. Dad, I think we should discuss my share. I know the legal document said it was yours, but morally, there's something that belongs to you," I interrupted. "I've been saving it." His face brightened. "Really?" I stood and walked to my study. Came back with a small brass key in my palm. "It's been in storage. I want you to have it." Confusion crossed his face. "A cradle. For Celeste. Your grandmother's handiwork." It's locked. I wanted to make sure it stayed safe until I could give it to you properly. I led him to the spare room where the cradle sat in the corner. The same cradle that had been in the back of my truck the day I found the sold sign. The same cradle I'd carved stars into, thinking of a grandson I'd never meet. Everett looked at the cradle, looked back at me. That's it, a cradle. I nodded. Look inside. He reached in and found it resting against the smooth wooden bottom, a single card. White. Plain. My handwriting in black ink. He picked it up, read it. The greatest gift I ever gave you was the chance to be a decent man. You sold it. The room went very quiet. Everett read the card again. Then again. His hand holding it started to shake slightly. That's your inheritance, I said quietly. That card. That's what I'm leaving you. Not money, not property, not the wine collection. Just the truth about what you chose to become. He set the card down carefully in the cradle like it might burn him if he held it too long. When he looked up at me, his face had changed. The calculation was gone. The entitlement was gone. What remained was something I hadn't seen in years, recognition. The faint, terrible recognition that he understood what he'd done. What happened to the money? He asked finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. From the wine collection, he nodded. I gave it away, I said. Every dollar, all of it. You gave away $2 million. I donated it to establish a scholarship foundation, the Margot Harrington Scholarship, for children who lost their parents or are in foster care, kids who need someone to show up for them, kids like your daughter might have been if you'd stayed away much longer. Everett stared at me. The scholarship fund, the one in the newspaper, that was your mother's wine collection. 35 years of our marriage. Every bottle we saved to celebrate being alive. I sold all of it and gave the money to children who actually needed help. You could have... He stopped. Started again. We could have what split it. Given you $1 million for selling the house I gave you. Rewarded you for moving across the country without telling me. He had no answer. The cradle is yours, I said. Take it or leave it. But that's all you're getting from me. Everett looked down at the card again, picked it up, read it one more time. The greatest gift I ever gave you was the chance to be a decent man. You sold it. He stood there holding the card, and for the first time since he'd walked into my house months ago demanding to know where the wine cellar was, he looked like he might actually understand what he'd lost. It wasn't the money. It was never about the money. It was the chance to be the kind of man his mother would have been proud of. And he'd sold that chance for a house he didn't want, and a fortune he'd never asked about until it was worth something. I gave it to children who lost their parents, I told him. All of it. Every dollar. In your mother's name. Everett stood there holding the card from the cradle, and I watched understanding settle over him like cold water. The wine collection he'd never asked about. The fortune he'd learned existed only after it was appraised. The inheritance he'd assumed was his. Gone. Given away. Donated to strangers. One to us. The Margot Harrington Scholarship Foundation. I continued. For children who lost parents too young. Kids in foster care. Kids whose families fell apart. Your mother spent 28 years teaching preschool. She believed every child deserved someone paying attention. So that's what the money does. It pays attention to kids who need it. Everett opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked down at the card again. All of it, he finally asked. Yeah, and $2.15 million? Every cent from the wine collection she and I built together. It's helping children go to college. Children who actually need help. He looked at me. Really looked at me. And I saw something I hadn't seen in years, the moment when reality crashes through denial, when a person realizes they've lost something that can never be recovered. She would have wanted this, I said quietly. You should have wanted this. Everett had no answer for that. He walked to my front door, stopped on the threshold, turned back once, mouth opening like he might say something. But whatever words he was searching for didn't come. He offered a slight nod, nothing more. Then he walked to his rental car, got in, and drove away. I stood in my doorway and watched his taillights disappear down the street. The same way I'd watched him drive away months ago, the night he'd left after Vernon's offer. The same way I'd watched him leave every time he'd visited over the past year, always taking something, never giving anything back. But this time felt different. Final. The lock clicked shut behind me, and I realized I'd just closed the door on my son for what might be the last time. And instead of grief or regret or the heavy weight of loss, I felt something unexpected. I felt lighter. 6 weeks later, Patricia Morrison called and asked if I'd come help set up for the foundation's first ceremony. We're announcing the scholarship recipients, she said. The kids will be there with their families, or their foster families, or their caseworkers. It would mean a lot if you could be there. You're the reason this exists. Margot's the reason, I corrected. Then come represent her. The community center was decorated with balloons and banners. Patricia had organized everything with the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years running events. Tables with refreshments, chairs arranged in rows, a small podium with a microphone, and children. A dozen of them ages 8 to 17, each one a scholarship recipient. Each one a life that would be changed by money Margot and I had saved one bottle at a time. Patricia introduced me to several of them. A teenage girl whose mother died of cancer, twin boys whose father was incarcerated, a quiet 16-year-old in foster care who wanted to be a nurse, and Sophie. Sophie was 8 years old, with dark hair and serious brown eyes. She wore a dress that was slightly too big, probably borrowed or donated. She stood near the refreshment table watching everything with careful attention. When I walked past, she looked up at me. "Are you the grandpa?" she asked. I stopped. "What?" Ms. Morrison said. "A grandpa made this happen. The scholarship." "Are you him?" Something in my chest tightened. "I helped, yes." "Did you build this place for us?" I tried to," I said. The words came out before I could think about what they meant, carrying weight I didn't explain. Sophie studied me with those serious eyes. "You did good. My mom would say thank you if she could. Your mom, she died last year. Car accident. My dad's not around. I live with my aunt now. She's nice, but there's not a lot of money. Ms. Morrison says this scholarship means I can go to college someday." I crouched down so we were at eye level. This 8-year-old child, who'd lost her mother, whose father had abandoned her, who was living with an aunt, barely scraping by. "Your mom would be proud of you," I said. Sophie smiled. A real smile, bright and sudden. Ms. Morrison showed us a picture of the lady the scholarship's named after. Mrs. Harrington. She was a teacher, right? She was. She loved children. She would have loved meeting you. I wish I could have met her. Me too. Sophie's small hand reached out and grabbed mine. "Come on, Grandpa. I want to show you something." She pulled me across the room toward a display board. Her palm was warm and trusting in a way I'd forgotten hands could be. Not demanding, not calculating, just the simple, uncomplicated trust of a child who believed adults showed up when they said they would. The display showed Margot's photograph, the same one from the newspaper, the one from her classroom. Surrounded by information about the scholarship, about how many students would be helped, about what the endowment would accomplish. "Now that's her," Sophie said, pointing. "She's pretty. She looks nice. She was," I said, my voice thick. "She was the nicest person I ever knew." Patricia appeared beside us. "Sophie's one of our first recipients. She'll use the scholarship in 10 years when she goes to college. Now, I want to be a teacher, Sophie said, like Mrs. Harrington, so I can help kids who don't have parents either. I had to look away for a moment, had to blink hard, had to breathe. Sophie squeezed my hand. Are you okay, Grandpa? I'm fine, I managed. I'm very fine. The ceremony started. Patricia gave a speech. The scholarship recipients were recognized. Families clapped. Sophie sat in the front row, turning back every few minutes to make sure I was still there, waving each time she caught my eye. When it ended, Sophie ran over to me. I gotta go. My aunt's waiting. But I'll see you at the next meeting, right? Ms. Morrison says there's one every month. I'll be there, I said. Promise. A promise. She hugged me quickly, then ran off toward the door, calling back over her shoulder. See you later, Grandpa. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like I'd always been her grandpa. Like that's what I was supposed to be. Patricia stood beside me watching Sophie disappear through the door. These kids are going to change your life, she said softly. I smiled. She had no idea it had already happened. A year had passed when I stood before 200 people holding oversized ceremonial scissors, about to cut the ribbon on the Margot Harrington Scholarship Foundation Center. The building itself wasn't grand. A renovated community center 3 blocks from my watch shop, with conference rooms that would host tutoring sessions and a small library stocked with college preparation materials. Patricia Morrison stood beside me, beaming in her navy suit, holding the other handle of the scissors. Neuland, she whispered, say a few words before we cut. I hadn't prepared anything. Public speaking had always been Margot's strength, not mine. But 200 faces looked up at me expectantly, scholarship recipients, their foster families, volunteers, donors who'd matched my initial endowment to expand the program beyond what I'd imagined possible. My wife believed that the most valuable thing you could give a child was attention, I said. My voice carried better than I expected. Not money, not opportunities, attention, noticing them, seeing them as they actually are, not as you wish they were. Sophie sat in the front row, 9 years old now, wearing the glasses we'd helped her get last spring. Beside her sat Marcus, 13, whose foster mother worked 2 jobs. Behind them, 17 faces I'd come to know over the past year, children who'd lost parents like Margot had, like these scholarship recipients had. This foundation exists because my wife never stopped paying attention, I continued. To broken watches, to broken people, to the small repairs that make things run true again. She would have loved what you're all becoming. I cut the ribbon. The gathered crowd applauded, and then Sophie was running forward, wrapping her arms around my waist. Grandpa, she called, and suddenly 6 other children were surging forward, all of them hugging me, all of them using that word that Everett's daughter had never once said to my face. Over their heads I saw him. Everett stood at the back of the crowd, partially hidden behind a support column. Saskia beside him, holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls. 5 years old now. Celeste, my granddaughter. The child I'd imagined bringing to the wine cellar when she turned 18, the one I'd carved a cradle for before she was born. They'd come. Despite everything, they'd come. Asterisk. The ceremony lasted another hour. Patricia gave a presentation about the foundation's first-year impact. 12 scholarships, awarded mentorship programs, established partnerships with 3 local colleges. I shook hands until my fingers ached, accepted congratulations from strangers who called me generous, visionary, inspirational, words that meant nothing. I kept watching the back of the room, but Everett's family had disappeared into the crowd. When I finally escaped to get water from the refreshment table, I heard her voice. Why doesn't Grandpa hug us anymore? I turned. Celeste stood 3 feet away, looking up at her father with confused, hurt eyes. She'd seen the scholarship children embrace me, seen me smile and laugh with them, ruffle their hair, listen to their stories about school and friends and dreams. "The sweetheart," Everett said quietly, kneeling beside her. "It's complicated." "Hey, but he hugs them," she insisted, pointing at Sophie, who was showing Marcus something on her phone. "Why not us?" Everett looked at me then. Really looked at me. His expression held something I couldn't quite identify, shame maybe, or recognition. The understanding that his daughter had just articulated what he'd done better than any amount I could have explained. He'd placed me in a category: abandoned parent, discarded obligation. Someone whose feelings didn't require the same attention as strangers because blood meant you'd always be there, always forgive, always make it easy. But strangers, scholarship children, foster kids, the overlooked and dismissed, they received the best of me now. The attention Margot had taught me to give. The noticing. "I don't know, sweetheart," Everett finally said. "I don't know." They left without saying goodbye. That evening, I sat in my workshop with Margot's watch. I'd kept it in its case for 11 years, unable to look at it, without feeling the weight of her absence. But tonight, after Celeste's question, after seeing what my choice had created, children who called me grandpa, while my actual granddaughter wondered why I wouldn't touch her, I needed to understand something. The watch had stopped the day Margot died, 3:47 p.m. frozen in time. I opened the case back with steady hands. The movement inside was a masterpiece, a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar, one of the finest watches ever made. She'd bought it for herself on our 20th anniversary, refusing to let me gift it to her. "I want to choose this," she'd said. "I want to choose something that will last." The mainspring had simply wound down. Nothing broken, nothing damaged. Just time stopped waiting for someone to pay attention. I wound it carefully, listening to the familiar click of the ratchet wheel. Set the hands. The second's hand began its sweep, steady and true. That's when I saw it. Engraved on the inside of the case, back so small, I'd never noticed in all the years I'd serviced this watch. "Time is only lost when you stop paying attention." Her handwriting. Engraved when she'd bought it, maybe. Or added later. A message she'd known I'd eventually find when I was finally ready to repair what had stopped. I sat there for a long time, holding that watch, feeling it tick against my palm. She'd left me instructions after all. Margot's inscription became my compass. 3 nights after the inauguration, I sat at my writing desk composing a letter to a 5-year-old who wouldn't read it for 13 years. The desk lamp cast a small circle of light. Beyond it, my apartment held the accumulated silence of 2 years spent avoiding the question Celeste had asked her father. "Why doesn't Grandpa hug us anymore?" I knew why. But she deserved to know too when she was old enough to understand. The pen felt heavy. How do you explain betrayal to a child? How do you write about her father's choices without poisoning her against him? "Your grandmother's name was Margot," I continued. "She died when you were too young to remember meeting her. She believed the most important thing you could give someone was attention, real attention, the kind that notices what matters." I told her about the house, about the renovations I'd done while imagining her family making memories there, about the wine cellar I'd built knowing your father would appreciate it, and the cradle I'd carved before she was born. "There was a card in that cradle," I wrote. It said, "For my grandson. I didn't know yet that you were a girl, but I loved you already." My hand cramped. I kept writing. "Your father made a choice after I gave him that house. He decided I wasn't important anymore. And your mother Saskia supported that choice. They didn't mean to hurt me. They just stopped paying attention. I gave everything in that wine cellar away," I wrote. $2.15 million worth. I donated it all to create a scholarship foundation in your grandmother's name. For children who lost their parents like she did. Like I almost did when I lost her. The words came faster now, I couldn't be in your life while watching your parents treat me like I didn't matter. It hurt too much. So I chose other children instead, kids who needed someone to pay attention to them, to notice them, to show up. I paused, pen hovering over paper. I hope when you're old enough to read this, you'll understand. I hope you'll forgive me for not being there. And I hope my throat tightened. I hope your father learned to pay attention to what matters. To you, to your mother, to the people who love you. One last thing. Behind the house your father sold, there's an oak tree near the property line. Your grandmother and I used to sit under it on summer evenings. She'd tell me about the children she'd grown up with in foster care, the ones nobody noticed. That tree is still there. Go find it someday, sit under it, and think about what matters to you. What deserves your attention. I signed it simply, your grandfather, Leland Harrington. The envelope went into my desk drawer, addressed to Celeste Harrington, to be opened December 2038. Whether she'd read it was beyond my control. All I could do was preserve the truth and hope she'd someday want to know it. The following week, I reopened the watch shop. Not because I needed the income, the foundation ran itself now, and my pension covered my modest needs. But because Margot's inscription had reminded me time is only lost when you stop paying attention. And I'd stopped paying attention to who I was. I was a watchmaker, a repairer of broken mechanisms, a man who understood that sometimes things just needed someone to notice they'd stopped running. The open sign had collected dust for 2 years. I cleaned it carefully, replaced the bulb, hung it back in the window. Harold Buckley was my first customer. My old neighbor, still living 3 blocks away, appeared within an hour of the sign going up. He carried a wooden box. I recognized his grandfather's pocket watch, a 1947 Hamilton that had stopped running in 2019. "I've been waiting for you to come back," Harold said, setting the box on my workbench. "Nobody else can fix this one." I opened the case. The movement inside was corroded, several jewels cracked. It would take weeks to restore. "I'm not doing this for the money anymore," I said. Harold smiled. "I know. That's why we came back." That exit twist settled into my chest, like a gear clicking into place. The shop wasn't about business. It wasn't about profit or productivity or proving I still had value. It was about reclaiming the identity I'd let Everett's betrayal steal from me. I was a man who fixed broken things, who paid attention to mechanisms nobody else wanted to notice, who understood that precision and care mattered more than speed or profit. By week's end, I had 12 clocks running in the shop, customers' repairs, waiting for pickup. Their overlapping ticks filled the space like a conversation, each mechanism speaking its own rhythm, all of them measuring the same forward motion of time. Asterisk. On New Year's Eve morning, I flipped the open sign and watched morning light catch its surface. Through the window, I saw Sophie walking past with Patricia and 2 other scholarship children. They spotted me and waved, faces bright with recognition. Sophie pressed her palm against the glass, grinning. I waved back. This is what Margot meant about paying attention. Some things break, some things can't be repaired, but some things, the things that matter, are worth returning to, worth noticing, worth the careful, patient work of restoration. The clocks ticked behind me, keeping time. The restoration work continued through the holidays. On Christmas morning, I found Sophie and 3 other scholarship children on my porch, bundled against the December cold, their breath forming small clouds in the winter air. "You have to come," Sophie insisted. "It's Christmas and your family." Family. The word had changed shape over 2 years. It no longer meant blood and obligation. It meant the people who chose to show up, who noticed when you mattered. I grabbed my coat. The community center hummed with joyful chaos. 20 scholarship children, foster families, and volunteers filled every corner. Patricia Morrison orchestrated everything from the kitchen doorway with the calm authority of someone who had once managed military operations. and now applied those same skills to holiday potlucks. "There's always been a place set for you," she said when she saw me. I sat among them with Margot's repaired watch on my wrist, its steady tick reminding me that some broken things could be restored to perfect time. Around me, children laughed and tore through wrapping paper with unself-conscious joy. Sophie pressed close beside me, proudly showing off the new art supplies her foster mother had given her. 10 years old now, confident in ways she hadn't been when we first met. "Margot would have loved this," I said quietly. Patricia heard me anyway. "She would have loved you," she said. "This version. The one who chose to show up." We stayed until evening, until the children were tired and full, and the center fell quiet. I drove home through empty streets, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, not happiness exactly, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've aligned yourself with what actually matters. 3 days later, I found myself driving past the old house. I hadn't planned it. Vernon Caldwell had painted the trim darker, replaced the porch railing, added solar panels to the roof. But the oak tree stood exactly where it always had, nearly a foot taller than when I'd left. 36 rings now. Vernon stepped onto the porch. We looked at each other across the distance. Then he nodded, a simple, respectful gesture. "I'm taking care of it. It's in good hands." I nodded back and drove away without looking back. Some things you build, some things you plant, and then you let them grow without you. New Year's Eve found me in the watch shop, surrounded by timepieces ticking in quiet harmony. 2 hours until midnight. 2 hours until a year neither Margot nor I could have imagined. Here was the final wisdom that had taken me 69 years and 2 years of grief to understand: you cannot fix a clock by adjusting its hands. The problem is always the internal mechanism, the mainspring, the escapement, the balance wheel knocked out of true. I couldn't fix Everett. Couldn't make him value what he'd discarded. His internal mechanism had lost synchronization with mine long before everything collapsed between us. But I had fixed myself, wound my own mainspring, found my balance again in work and purpose, in children who called me grandpa because they chose to. I set Margot's watch beside the others on the workbench. The clocks kept ticking, measuring time forward, paying attention to each second with the precision she had loved. Some things can be repaired. Some things cannot. The wisdom is knowing which is which. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply choosing peace over proving you were right. I spent months angry, wanting my son to feel the weight of what he'd done. Don't make my mistake. Don't let bitterness consume the time you have left. I could have stayed trapped in that rage, waiting for an apology that might never come. Instead, I chose to rebuild what mattered: purpose, attention, and the ability to show up for people who actually saw me. Real family justice isn't about punishing those who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their choices define your worth. I learned that chosen family can heal wounds that blood relatives created. This isn't one of those dad's revenge stories where everything ends in courtroom drama or public humiliation. It's about quiet dignity and understanding that some clocks can't be fixed, no matter how skilled the watchmaker. I believe God put those scholarship children in my path to show me that love isn't owed. It's offered freely by those who choose to see you. That's the real victory. If this story touched you, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever experienced family justice in your own life? These dad's revenge stories aren't about winning, they're about healing. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and if you want more stories about choosing yourself over toxic expectations, subscribe to Wise Revenge. Your story matters too. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. Please remember that some details in this story have been fictionalized for narrative and reflection. What's real is the lesson: you can't fix everyone, but you can always repair yourself.